Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most notoriously bleak and unflinching books you'll ever come across, Thomas Ligotti's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race.
Right out of the gate, Ligotti hits you with this. He doesn't ease you in, he just gives you the brutal punchline that frames his entire argument. And trust me, this isn't just a dark thought, it's the very foundation for everything that's about to follow.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack in this explainer. We're going to walk step by step through one of the darkest, most challenging philosophical arguments ever put to paper, all using Ligotti's own logic as our roadmap.
So Ligotti's entire case really begins right here, with what he sees as a massive evolutionary accident, our own self-awareness. He argues it wasn't a gift, it was a terrible, tragic glitch.
This is what he calls the horror of being, and it's what separates us from literally every other living thing on this planet. See, an animal is just wired to survive, but we're cursed with knowing that our survival is temporary, that it's often filled with pain, and we're forced to ask why into a universe that never ever answers back.
And this chart just lays it bare, doesn't it? Animals just live. They're driven by instinct, and that's it. But we are forced to stare into the abyss, to think about the meaninglessness of it all, basically every single day. We're the only animal that's read the script and knows it doesn't have a happy ending. Okay, so if being aware is really that horrifying, how do we even get out of bed in the morning? How do we function at all? Well, according to Ligotti, we do it by building these incredibly elaborate and sophisticated systems of pure denial. Now, Ligotti borrows heavily from another philosopher, Peter Wessel Zapffe, who laid out these four main coping mechanisms. But these aren't seen as healthy tools. Oh no, they're delusions, because they all require us to actively lie to ourselves. We either just pretend the scary stuff isn't there, we anchor ourselves to big ideas that promise a meaning that doesn't exist, we distract ourselves to death with work and hobbies, or, and this is the ironic one, we make art about the very horror we're trying so desperately to escape. And this quote, wow, it just flips a core human virtue completely on its head. In Ligotti's world, hope isn't a strength, it's a malfunction. It's basically a chemical delusion that's been hardwired into our brains just to keep the species stumbling forward, completely against all logic and evidence. This delusion of hope then bleeds into our very sense of who we are, our sense of control. You know, we love to think we're the captains of our own ship, making our own choices. But what if we're not actually steering at all? Ligotti argues that free will is just a comforting myth. We're basically, in his words, meat puppets, being jerked around by forces we can't even see, let alone control. Our biology, the society that raised us, random things that happen to us, and just plain dumb luck. These are the real puppet masters. Okay, so if life is just suffering and we have no real control, where does this train of thought end up? Well, it leads to a conclusion that is incredibly chilling, but also strangely logical. And that final stop is anti-natalism. The argument is simple, but it's brutal. You cannot get consent from someone who hasn't been born yet. Therefore, procreation is a fundamentally unethical act because it forces a state of suffering onto a new person without ever getting their permission.
So, in this framework, the most compassionate, the most moral choice you can make is to just stop, to let the human species gently fade away by choosing not to have kids, and by doing so, spare all future generations from being dragged into the conspiracy of life itself.
Given this intensely bleak outlook on everything, where can we possibly find any shred of honesty? Well, according to Ligotti, you won't find it in religion or self-help books. You find it in a very surprising place, the horror genre.
Yeah, his argument is that while most of our culture is built on pretty distractions and optimistic lies, horror is the one art form that actually has the guts to tell the truth. It looks reality square in the face and says, yeah, this is chaotic, this is indifferent, and it is fundamentally hostile to us.
And this is exactly why writers like H.P. Lovecraft are so central to his philosophy. Their stories about cosmic indifference, about these vast, uncaring alien gods, they aren't just fiction. For Ligotti, they're some of the most honest philosophical statements ever made because they portray a universe that truly, deeply could not care less about you. So, let's bring it all home. Let's trace the brutal logic of this entire argument one last time. It all starts with this core premise, that our self-awareness, the very thing we think makes us so special, is actually an evolutionary mistake,
a curse that just lets us see the bars of our own cage.
And if consciousness is a curse, then that optimism we all cling to isn't a virtue. It's a necessary delusion. It's a form of psychosis that stops our minds from completely collapsing under the weight of what's real.
And if we're living inside that delusion, just trying to survive the horror of being aware, then our sense of control must also be a total illusion. We aren't making choices, we are simply puppets reacting to the strings of biology and pure chance.
And if we're just puppets, suffering without any control, then the act of creating new life becomes a deeply, morally questionable act. Forcing this condition onto someone else without their consent is the ultimate crime.
Which leads us to the final, bleakest point of all. If being born is an unethical act, then non-existence is actually preferable to existence. In this view, death isn't a tragedy. It's the ultimate release. It's the mercy that finally ends the conspiracy of being alive.
And this brings the entire devastating philosophy right back to us, doesn't it? It forces us to look at the very things we believe keep us going, our hopes, our dreams, our sense of purpose, and ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Are these the things that actually give life meaning, or are they just the elegant lies we tell ourselves to survive the joke?